Hello and welcome back to Startups, People and Equity. This is a space where we discuss topics, related to startups, people and equity. We hope that you will enjoy listening to today's episode as much as we enjoyed recording it. Let's dive straight in. Welcome, Chloe. Chloe specializes in people operations, has experience leading internal people teams and startups in the VC space, as well as being an external consultant helping many companies on their strategies and implementation. Currently, she's a partner at Hyple. That's a London-based people consultancy focusing on early-stage companies that are not necessarily VC-backed. It's great to have you, Chloe. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Would you like to add anything to the intro?
No, it summarized pretty well. I think that was quite nice. I think with my experience, maybe we'll go into a little bit more in depth afterwards. But it's very varied, and as you introduced me correctly, it's I like to do a lot of different things. So it's quite exciting. I quite like the variety.
I would already like to go off script and ask, like with Hyple, so not necessarily only VC backed. How does people ops differ in a company that is VC backed, let's say recently, so you can still feel the investors' presence, and an SME?
Very good question. It does and it doesn't. Because those companies, even if they're not VC-backed, they still want to grow, right? And they still need to compete with VC-backed companies. So they still have that ambition, that drive to do that. And they understand that they need to have foundations in place to be able to fight against the competition. As I said, there's no much difference between them, right? They all want to grow. They all want to be the leader in that space. So for them, it's important to have the right foundations, and they look at companies, right, that are in that space that will be VC backed. And I think what's really interesting right now, and you see the shift, especially, since the last few months that we've been through, is that VCs are also looking at companies to go into a profitability path rather than a hyper growth path, right? And so those SMEs companies that might not have not been in that hyper growth drive might now they're in a better environment for that, right? They're in a better space. So I think it's just when you're VC back, you just have more money, right? And what you do with the money, you usually spend it quite fast. A lot of them do, and you just inflate your teams. You overpromise. You think let's expand in 12 countries in a year. We've never expanded before, right? We never went in anywhere else of our home market, but we have raised, so we need to we need to do something for the next raise. And as you know, it's not healthy. We've seen what happens when you inflate your team so much. Like all the layoffs recently, in the last year, have been a testament to that.
Absolutely. And I think we will continue on that angle, but I really wanted to ask you, do you think there is one talent market from the perspective that startups and non-VC backed companies compete for the same talent?
Yes. Yeah. Yes, 100%. Because a lot of companies a lot of people don't necessarily know that those companies are VC backed, right? Because some SMEs might have just angel funding. So we worked recently with a company last year that had raised a significant amount, but it wasn't VC backed. So that was, you can still do that. There's companies that crowdfund, that can crowdfund quite a large amounts if they need to. And so I think people don't necessarily look hey, this company has been funded by. It's more like, do you have the money for? Because I think now it's known that you can be VC backed or not. You can still go under. The security is not like certain for that. So I think there is a bit more, I think, flexibility for people, and I think they don't have that that view that others might have.
Do you see that there are different levels of understanding of certain people topics when it comes to SMEs versus startups?
It depends on the industry that they're in, rather than if it's a VC-backed company or not. For example, if the company comes from non-tech industry and it wants to digitalize, then it's then yes, there's a bit of a what's it called? A bit of obstacles to go through first, right? A bit of education to do, rather than in what I've seen is other tech companies. We worked with an agri-tech business where most of the people understood all the things that we wanted to implement, which was very tailored to a tech startup that we usually do. But then there was also a part in the organization, there was a group of people that might have been a little bit less exposed to those principles, those practices. So they took a little bit of time to get used to it. And it's also because it depends on the industry that you're in. You might be in an industry that you're trying to modernize and digitalize. And so you ask people from the industry to come and work with you. And they might have not worked in that environment before. So it's a bit of a process, a bit of a development for their part. But I think that's the exciting part, right? I think you get really interesting people that bring different views. And so that, I think that's what excites me, to see what we implement and change people perspective. Because sometimes working in tech, you're so used to the same. You mean you're in a bubble, right? So sometimes you don't see the scale of the change that you implement as you will do it in this type of companies. But then there's also the other side. You might work with companies where they come from a quite traditional background and they want to be more modern and come into the digital world. But the entire organization is based on people that worked in the old system, and they're maybe creatives, especially in the creative industry. It is not as tech driven as people think. It might think, in art, proper art, like photography or painting or sculpture, or even fashion. A lot of it's still very much very old school, very conservative in that way, right? So changing how it goes, it's way, way tougher, because the entire organization is still following it has maybe never experienced a tech startup, maybe never experienced in these new practices and principles. So it takes a bit longer for them to get to the point. And the honesty is also, some of them are in a position that they don't have to and they don't want to, and so they will not do it. But so far it's been positive. A lot of people are very open to change and understanding that things needs to change in their industry. So
I went through or I met a couple of different bubble people in the last month and a half, ranging from traditional HR that I don't feel bad calling it HR, because that's exactly what they're doing, then to a big conference where a lot of SMEs were meeting up and exchanging HR/people practices. And it was very interesting to observe. It almost seems like a melting pot that was happening with nations a couple of decades ago is now happening within the people industry, within industries, within differently structured companies. And it was very interesting to me that a simple thing as career progression was a novel thing for a lot of SMEs. It was this big undertaking. We have to do this now. It's going to help us with employer branding. And using words like employer branding was mind blowing to them. So you could see young people that had some startup experience now rose finally to a position within a company that had some power, and they started implementing startup things. But they were, perceived as geniuses and innovators and, bringing the HR industry forward, and startups have been living it for the last 50 years. It's a very, very interesting coming together. What do you see when it comes to this? Because do you see some of the old HR practices remaining, or do you wish some of them would remain in certain situations?
Interesting question. I'm trying to think which ones I would like to remain and not. The problem, I think, for me is that I don't know anything but the startup world when it comes to HR. I worked at Apple before, where, of course, it's a corporate, so it's has the different structures and different hoops that you need to go through, right? But it's still like a tech company, and I could not imagine how it would be to work in an HR team at Volkswagen or Mercedes or Siemens, because it's also, I think, very much driven into into the employees and into the organization, that HR is just a lot of admin, a lot of mother hen type people that are there to take care of people, and so kind of compensate for whatever attitude or behaviors the leadership has, which is not exactly what we were supposed to do. So I think what I like about the startup world that changes, and I think it should change everywhere, is that people has a main role, and in the startup it's becoming much bigger, right? It took a journey because it wasn't like that, and you speak to people, leaders that have worked in startups, scale ups, and corporate, and it's always a frustration because you're always the one dealing with lots of issues because you were not brought in before. So you still need to solve problems, and you never have a seat at the table. While if you think about it, this function takes care of pretty much 90% of what your company is built on. Because if you remove all your people, what are you going to do? Because it's not until, or at least for now, a company's not a machine fully, right? It's still powered by humans. And so I think what it's quite interesting to see is how this function, the companies that say, hey, you take care of our people. You need to be responsible for attracting talent, make sure that we acquire talent fast and cost effectively, and the best talent out there, and then making sure that you need to keep that talent and retain it and make sure it develops. And so there's a lot of responsibilities around that. And of course, the managers are supposed to also do part of this job as well. But I think if you look at both of it, right, there's sometimes very little focus and little understanding of the manager's role. Like, we don't give training to managers at all. Like, when I went from being a customer service manager, with nobody to look after. Like I didn't have a team, to a head of customer service with 20 people. I didn't have training. It was a completely different level, completely different role that maybe I wasn't ready for. And how many people in startups went through this kind of hoop, right? And at the same time, you cannot not blame founders or the CEOs, because they don't know that either. They didn't have that either before, right? They just don't know that's available until, especially I think first-time founders, but afterwards they will learn, hey, we should have probably had training on this and give people the right tools to do this. And it's the same thing with the people function. It's like, oh, it's there. We don't really need to give them much. It's still going to do this job, still going to support the company. But do we really need to give them a seat at the table? Do we really acknowledge that what they do is so central and pivotal? So it's it's an interesting view, and it's also one thing that, for example, at Hyple and also through EQT Ventures, I'm trying to do within my role is helping companies change their perception of what a people function is, change how they develop managers and have managers within their companies, which I think, that's what excites me. And then seeing the success stories afterwards.
I'm wondering if you can see any common denominators between businesses that do attach a significance to the people department. I'm asking this from like a candidate's perspective. Like, if I was to work for a startup, I really think that I would want to work for one where people is considered to be a strategic part of the decision making, and not just a department that you inform after the decision has been made. So I'm wondering if I can spot anything without having deep insights into the companies that would help me judge them on this perspective.
That's really, really good question, and something I've been thinking about recently. How do you spot that? And it's very hard. I think so. One thing I didn't learn before getting into the consultancy business and with Hyple and then with EQT, this kind of oral learning journey is it's about the values of a company, right? And how if you see a lot of companies have the same values, and it's very hard to distinguish them. So as a candidate, you don't know who, like, you don't really know who that company is, right? And I think one thing maybe as a candidate that you should look at is, who is this company? What they're really motivated by, right? Is it just the usual word like innovation, challenge, teamwork? Like, is it really that? Like, it's come on, it's different. It's each company is different. You can't, like, 100 companies all have innovation and teamwork and challenge as their own values. Like, it would be quite boring. So each company has a different values, different motivators, right? And also different behaviors attached to that. And I think that's the important part, right? And I think maybe as a candidate, what you should look at is, what does this company value? What is their true self? And what kind of, is it that, instilled in the behaviors that then I see in interviews? And you can ask them, right? You can ask questions about, for example, maybe, you can ask them about career progression. That's very wide, but you can ask a bit more like detailed question, which is, how does that impact, for example, my my compensation, right? I think we should have this kind of more honest conversations at that stage as well. Okay, you have a career development path. What does it stand for? how do people progress through the different levels, how many levels they are, does each level then correspond to a potential compensation uplift? Because if they say no, then the question is that, are they really putting people at the focus, right? Because I would expect a company that does that to have a good understanding of the compensation structure or what they want to approach with it, right? And so connected to then a career development path for their employees. Because we don't want to like every 6 months to give a raise, and we don't want to give a raise just while promoting people. So I think it's having those more kind of in-depth questions about this type of topics rather than going very broad, which is very hard for junior people. I think it's much harder. And I also notice talking to different leaders, the more junior they are, the more unwilling they are to show that they don't know something, that they're less experienced about something. And so they're less likely to ask those kind of difficult questions, where I hope that more experienced leaders will come in with a much broader view of it, and so being able to ask much more in-depth questions about it.
I think this ties very nicely into what is appropriate at a certain stage of a company. So when you have a very early stage company, before any type of product market fit or before any type of real revenue creation, what is the responsibility kind of split between the candidate and the company when it comes to taking care of career progression? So let's imagine a company. They have 5 employees. They need to get some type of profitability. Every single waking hour goes towards that. How much can they spend on career progression? So at what point does it become a need to have versus at what point is it more important to actually be a good business? There's many different opinions, and I think my opinion is that it's a split of responsibilities. We have to be honest towards ourselves. Am I looking for something that offers stability and career progression? Then I probably shouldn't join a very early stage startup that isn't able to offer me that. But if they are saying they can offer me that, then that's fine. It's just I think there is a split in responsibilities rather than just companies have to do it and candidates should expect it. It's a
it's really interesting, because the issue I think with that is that a lot of people are not honest with themselves, right? They are all about, this is what I should do. This is where my career should be at. And our generation, for example, has this whole fear of missing out. And because a lot of founders and successful founders and CEOs, I mean, determination of success is it's another topic, but let's call it successful for traditional standards. They've been successful at 25. They sold their company. They've done so much before they reach 25 that then you have this kind of idea in your head that is like, well, what did I do until when I reached 25? What should I do in the next 10 years? Like, it's kind of like it's a race to being able to show that you are as great as those people, and you want to show that to the world, right? And if you look at LinkedIn, it's all about that at the moment. It's all about showing all the things that we do, despite they be so little, so irrelevant to your professional life as well. It's about like showing, hey, look at me. And it's because we have this concept that this is what success is, and this is where we need to be at that stage. So going back to your question, it's quite hard, I think, for candidates to be honest with themselves. I mean, companies are not honest with themselves, first of all. So you already have a bit of like a dishonesty going there from both sides. But there are people that it will take them another 10 years to say, hey, actually, I don't enjoy working in a hustle environment. I hate it. And then there's people that love it. And I learned this from my experience when I pushed maybe some friends to go into certain roles and do certain things, because I loved my startup career. I think I could have done more of it at the start and hustle more and do more. But I loved being everywhere in the company, learning everything, putting my 10, 12 hours a day. It wasn't particular, and I know it's not healthy for a long period of time, but there are people, I have friends of mine that don't like that. They really struggle with the pressure, where I kind of enjoy the pressure. And so, but it took me a while to understand that. And I still talk to friends that have been in this world for like 10, 12 years. They're still not honest with themselves. So I think, yes, it's a bit of both, but I think it's quite hard to get there.
I would love an education system that takes the pressure off the parents to get there, because currently you don't get education on self-awareness in any of your schools, pretty much. Not even, if you study something not psychology related, not even at university do they talk to you about like the different career. They kind of leave it up to you to discover through different career events, or at least at the universities I've been to, it was the case.
Yeah, 100%.
It's such a missing skill set. Yes. I think it would be so much easier if we had that.
Yes. I mean, but at the same time, people will tell you that stuff when it comes from experience. I think maybe that what we can do from schools is, one, do a bit more of those roles, jobs that, experience more of the jobs that we're actually going to do. So to give that kind of feeling. And also and I think this is the harder part, is educating people that it's okay if you want to experiment. Your life is not going to end. It's okay if you don't want to become the founder of a company. It's okay if you just want to be somebody that does 9 to 5 and then does something else. You don't have to be a triathlete. You don't have to be an author. You don't have to be like the superstar person. You don't have to be that. It's okay just to do what you want to do. And like, it can be very, very different from other people are doing, right? It could be working at a post office behind a counter. Maybe that's what somebody likes to do. And it's okay. It's okay to be a plumber. I think we have also this kind of idea that being in anywhere in the trades industry, it's like, oh my God, no, you need to have a degree. It's okay to be an artist. It's okay to do all of this. And I think we missed that a little bit, right? I think there's been maybe our parents saying to us, like, you need to go to university. There's no other option. Otherwise, you'll never find a job. And now, to be honest, like, we all went to university and we cannot still find a job. I mean, not us, but you know what I mean? Like, we still have that problem. So I worked in the trade industry for a long time, and it's in a lot of ways is dying because they're really, they cannot attract younger generations to do these jobs, because as a society, we're telling people like those jobs are beneath you. You need to study, you need to be in an office. But why? Why people might want to build things? They might want to be carpenters, or might want to be this. And it's actually if you're quite skilled and good, it's a really rewarding career. You're always in demand. You'll never be out of a job. I think we should do a better role as a society to do that. But I think it's not So all like the companies are trying to, do what they think is best, and at the end of the day, they're also made of humans, and humans are flawed.
Yeah, the lines are getting very blurry. What you just said reminded me of a career progression conversation that you can have as a manager, where you are trying to discover what the person wants to do, and it might just happen that, I mean, in the back of your mind, you're saying to yourself, maybe you shouldn't be in startups. Maybe you should go and do something and create your own something. And that's where the lines get blurred between, I represent the company as a manager. The goal of the manager is what? In the eyes of the company is to maximize the business side of it. But as a person, it's to maximize the other person's potential. So it is kind of clashing. And I think that's where the people departments could have a very proactive role of somehow interacting not just within one company, but if we created a world where experimentation was possible, you say, oh, wow, this person really wants to do masonry. There you go. There's a local company. We do a bit of an exchange, and they found someone that is really tech savvy and loves to talking to customers. That's a utopia, but yeah, each person has a responsibility, and then the responsibility definition can be very different from person to person, and you can end up influencing a person's life so that they end up burnt out indirectly because of your actions, or they become super happy, but the company loses one of their best performers, for example. It's
Yes.
very big.
And I think that's the problem sometimes with the people function, is that you need to look after the business needs and the business goals and the business mission and all of that. But at the same time, you also have a duty to the people that they're there. And as you said, it's how do you have those conversations with your employees, and you might have one where it's very evident that they're not going to be good in the role that they're in, and they're not supposed to be in tech, which is it's fine. But then it's like telling somebody who's like, yeah, you're great, but you're not great at this, and you should leave and go and do something else. And there's a lot of factors there, is that, as a people leader, people team, it's hard to do, because first of all, you're pretty much saying to somebody, just quit, and the company will lose somebody who's good. Maybe it's not amazing in their job, but they're good at their job. And so you still want to keep them. And maybe from a cultural perspective, they are great, right? So you're pretty much telling somebody, please quit. The company will lose money doing that. And then potentially you put this person in a bit of a precarious situation, because you don't know how their family situation is. And maybe they do need this job to put food on the table. Yeah. And I think, what Thomas said about education, I think it's all about that, right? We need to kind of start earlier. It shouldn't have reached the company level. It should be like, this question should happen much sooner. And maybe a traditional thing that they used to do, I don't think they do it now, but before they used to do career assessments in high schools. And it will tell you roughly which career would have suited you more. And then they stopped doing that. And maybe it wouldn't be a bad thing to have them a bit more, future forward and potentially better assessments. But maybe have this in high school and kind of give people an outlook and having them experience those ones. And maybe the assessment is completely wrong. Maybe this person didn't want to be a doctor at all. They want to be a carpenter. So but having that experience, I think, will help younger generations as well, understanding where they would like to be, where to go, and also understanding it's okay if they want to be a doctor for the next 15, 20 years and then become a carpenter afterwards.
We actually had a very similar discussion. There was a debate on how to future-proof our talent or supply enough talent to the company if we're going to be very mechanical about it. And in the end, just the TLDR was usually innovation does not come because we predicted what job titles are going to be in the future, but because we gave the freedom of creativity to people early enough so that they created new ways of working in the market or creating AI, for example, whatever. But that at the same time was also only possible because of the experimentation phase. So it's less about assessing what the person wants in the moment, but giving them the freedom to experiment what maybe they don't want and not creating a role right now for them that says AI scientist, but it's exposing them to what the world actually is. And then they can create a role that will actually help develop the world further. It's a chicken egg all the time, but instead of prescribing, it's opening it up and offering insight early enough. That's tough job.
Yeah, I actually spoke to somebody last week about, it was just actually an intro call. I'm part of this operations community, and we have intro calls between community members every other week or so. And I met this man that he started his career as a financial analyst, if I'm not mistaken, working in, one of the big corporates. And then he decided to quit because he was miserable and became a chef. And he was a sous chef for 3 years. And then he decided that life wasn't for him. And he started his own company, giving advice and consulting startups on how to scale and grow. So I thought it was extremely interesting, his way of, his journey and what he said about how much he learned and how both experiences have made it possible for him to do what he's doing now. So I think back on what you said is about giving that creativity, that space for people to experiment and doing things, right? And then it could come that they're coming back to the same place that they might have started, right, as a circle, but you never know. So yeah, maybe giving more creativity to people to do different things will be great. I don't think it's a company's role to do that, though.
Yeah. Listening to our conversation so far, I'm not sure if at the last minute we will announce that we're coming out with a furniture line or if we're starting a new VC, but because really it's difficult to attach responsibility. Like if I had to, then I would probably say, investors should maybe watch out more, but then ultimately they have a fiduciary duty to the LPs, and then the LPs kind of, I don't know, actually maybe we could blame it on them because they already sit on a bunch of wealth. So if you create, let's say, if you expect a return that is sub market average, but you get a positive social change, but maybe they look at it, I donate to charity from this wing of my venture, I expect as high of a return as possible so that I can choose the charity I want to give to and solve societal problems there. I don't know.
I mean, yeah, some LPs though are pension funds, right? So there's also that responsibility they have to make sure that like a lot of people have pensions, which is another responsibility that's quite heavy, I think. It's a bit of a circle.
Yeah. In the end, I wonder if we go all the way and you have pensions, and that means that people, have something to live off of, which means in the end, it's actually the government. And then the government, what does it do? It's actually education. So we were right the first time. It's all about education.
And it all started with the government. And, last year I had a lot of conversations about companies trying to help their own employees through the downturn, and especially through the energy crisis. And, and there were questions about, should we give them a bonus every month? Should we help with the bills? Is it a one-off bonus okay? Should we raise salaries? What should we do? And I think, some companies really wanted to help a lot, but at the same time, there's a balance, right, of what the company can do and is able to do within their remit and their possibilities, because giving too much money in one go, for example, is that then hurting the business long term, which means that those people then lose their jobs. So maybe let's take a step back and think really carefully, like what we can do. But then at the same time, it's also a government responsibility. It's not the company's responsibility to make sure that those people can heat their houses and put food on the table. For those type of things, right? In terms of crisis, and I think also in terms of keeping checks on companies and making sure that they pay a fair wage, and also the cost of living doesn't go through the roof, right? So it goes back to the governments at the end of the day, and them educating the younger generations, and making things and putting things in place to make sure that people have then the space to be creative and do different things in life rather than just the path.
When we come out of this market downturn, how would you like to see the VC game change? Like, what do you think we should take away from this downturn, other than don't keep all of your money on one bank account? But maybe that's for another podcast.
I think what I would like to see more is less focus on hyper growth and more call it sustainable growth, but maybe responsible growth. It's very interesting. I spoke to a couple of finance leaders, and they also have the same type of concerns as people leaders do when it comes to hyper growth, right? People want it, but is that sustainable? No. And at the end, it's finance and people a lot of the times that need to fix it one way or another. And I think they see that a little bit more with like the long term. There's that, if we continue this path, it might not. There's going to be some consequences and some things that we'll need to pay for in a while, right? I think it's a balance, making sure that you're not too restrictive, right? You still give that possibility. But yeah, I think I would like to see that more from VCs, is allowing companies to maybe don't grow as fast, but grow better and more sustainable. So this doesn't happen again, right? Because during the downturn, we've seen that aside a lot of layoffs, there's been a lot of restructuring, and it takes time and money to do that. And that's why also one thing I would love for people leaders to be more is more commercially driven. People leaders should know how the P&L of the company looks like, have a full overview of the people finances. They should know how much it costs to acquire a new employee, how much it costs to retain a new employee. They should understand that. They should understand how much runway do they have, how much is their burn rate a month, because they can influence that quite heavily. And I think a lot of people leaders especially, have not given the opportunity to do that, to give them the tools to be able to understand that and to really influence that, because they're already doing it, but it's a bit different when if you don't have the full overview. And you can even have a seat at the table, by the way, but you still don't have the full overview of that, and you still don't have responsibility for those numbers. I think that's probably also a little bit, right? You're not responsible fully for the burn rate as you should. And maybe that could give them a different perspective and a different drive.
When you were saying first that usually when it comes to restructuring, finance and people have to kind of lead the process, then you said the seat at the table and the commercially focused, it really brings me back to the earlier conversation we were discussing what does give people the seat at the table. And then if I remember the last 3 years, 2 years, people were kind of at the hem because talent acquisition was so important and they were in these main conversations. And then how do I classify that? I classify it as a proactive activity. And what you mentioned also right now, when you have to discuss with finance and burn and making sure that the structure fits the commercial purpose, that seems like a proactive thing. Whereas in people roles, it is very easy to become reactive. Someone needs to be let go. Let me take care of that paperwork. We need some career progression. Let's do that. So I really wonder if there are, just like you said right now, proactive ways of being a people leader that commercially impact the entire company, and then that gets you a seat at the table. Because imagine you have, I don't know, what are some teams? Let's say a product team. They have overgrown because of the last 2 years. And you as the people leader could be there observing that and maybe flagging some things because you do have access, because one of the main roles and time spent could be with the manager, with the people. How's it going? Actually, no, there's 3 people that are doing 20% every day.
Mm-hmm.
We have overgrown. Maybe the proactivity could already happen there. I think it's people leaders could be the main drivers of profitability in the end.
Yes, 100%. And I think, there's a lot of things that already do, right? Because, like, for example, workforce planning, it's usually within the people remit anyway. The issue is that you do workforce planning and then it gets connected to the company's data, all of the data, like especially financial data. But a lot of the times people leaders just don't see that fully. They don't see that part. They only see the result, which is like, okay, no, we need to cut this, cut that. That's up here because it doesn't fit with the budgets. So you're just giving a budget afterwards, right? And you feed that. Rather than actually see why, where does it all stands and see the proper details of it. And I think that it's, even if you have people leaders that are at the seat of the table, they already been there. They still don't have access to that. And it's just a bit of, I think, an education when it comes to companies and on the whole leadership team that the people leaders can handle it. But they also need training. They also need more coaching around that, because it's not natural for them to be in that space, right? Because a lot of people leaders still come from that very traditional HR background. So they've been doing an amazing job in changing, evolving, and doing all the things that they have to do. But there's certain things that is just quite a distance from where they started, and it takes a bit of time. That's why, I've seen some companies doing really well when it comes to talent acquisition, for example, because they might have hired a VP talent that used to be a marketing leader. So that person has numbers and the commercial mindset set into them, and then they're just transferring what they learn and what they were doing in marketing in talent acquisition, which at the end of the day, like I like to tell companies that I advise, is that talent is your sales and marketing within a people function. That's what it is. So you should know everything in between when it comes to like acquiring that customer, because that's your customer, right? From A to Z, you need to fully be aware of all the process, of all the costs, of everybody involved. And then, the people function then goes back. There's product, there's engineering, there's customer success, there's finance, there's everything. Like, it has all different little pillars that if we look at it as a company within a company, maybe it would be easier to understand exactly, the extent of what the people function does. But at the same time, you need also the right people with the right skill sets for each pillar. And that's where I think there's a lot of work to do, because we don't do that. We just build a people team with just people doing one part and not multiple parts.
I found this macro level discussion thoroughly fascinating. And I'm wondering how we can keep this macro lens going forward, because I wanted to ask you a little bit about options and equity.
Yes.
So let's see if we can look at it from a similar perspective. Like, what are the macro trends that you have seen, and where do you think equity, what do you think equity's role is in creating like a healthier corporate structure when it comes to young companies?
I think equity is such a great way for people to really come together, right? We've seen it multiple times. That's where a lot of then, it's that kind of seed that then sprouts more. Because we've seen it, especially in the States and in other companies, like how early employees just took what they got from their from IPO, from selling, from the equity that they get, and then start their own company and be quite successful in changing a lot of the things that we know, which is great. That's what we want, right? I think sometimes when I see companies really missing the point when it comes to equity, because they never ask why. Why do we want to give equity to our employees? Why should we? Why do we want to give it to everybody? Why we want to only give it to leadership? And I think that's missing. And it goes back to the conversation that we had before, where companies think that giving equity is something that they should do. And giving equity is the only way for them to retain talent. Which it goes back to the same circle of like, I should give more money to you so you stay, which is, it's a very toxic relationship, to be honest. So I think we had a conversation of this before, but it's all about, when it comes to compensation, and equity is part of that, right? It's about the why we're doing this. Why do we compensate this? Why do we have this base salary percentile? Why do we have these benefits? Why do we have this equity structure? Because also, one thing I've seen with also early stage companies that then grew is that they give a lot of equity to people at the start, because they want to make them feel great. They're grateful, first of all, that those people are there, and they want to really attain that talent. But then the talent kind of fades out. Maybe they're really great for the first 2 or 3 stages, but then afterwards, they're not the right fit. And there's nothing wrong with that. They might, go back one step and then learn more, and maybe they will be there a couple of years in, but not right now. And so it's also important to understand, okay, I need to think about the future. If this company will be alive in 5 years, what I'm going to do, like, I need to also reward people for that will be there in that journey, that will help me reach those 5 years. And so if I decide equity is an important way for me to do that, I need to also make sure that I understand why, like, first of all, my why. I need to properly sit down and, put it down. But then also kind of structure equity and understanding, hey, this is where we're going to start, and this is when I'm going to be in the future. And this is when I will need to ask my investors to a pool top up because I don't have enough. But having those conversations, not on the last minute, that I've seen a lot of companies that it just, spur on them. And it's like, oh, I didn't think about this. I need to really reward these people. And I have literally 100 shares left. What do I do?
I think you really said it really well. The why is behind every number, even though a why is qualitative, the numbers then turn it into quantitative, which in some cases it's difficult to do. But there is a trend, or there are two parallel worlds developing. One of them is education, the other one is trend. So the trend of equity at this point in time has overtaken the level of education in the industry.
Mm-hmm.
So we have ideas about equity, but nothing to stand on for equity. And so these gaps then show up in, whoops, we went over the pool. Whoops, we don't know how much to offer to the CFO, so he turns us down.
Yes.
All in all, it's very...
And it goes back to the people leader being more commercially driven, also being more financially driven in that sense, right? Because if they are responsible for equity, which, as we discussed before, a lot of them are, putting something forward that it's just very shaky is not gonna get them that much further. It's not gonna further their agenda or what they really want to do. Because I think that if you really want to, you'll be able to push that, right? But as you said, if we don't have the right education or and it's like, what should I show them? And then she's like, oh, this is my plan, but there's no numbers. Well, it's not going to happen. It's not. Nobody's going to buy it, unfortunately, because at the end of the day, it's money. So, yeah, that's a really good way of saying it as well.
Yeah, I think at this point we have given our listeners such a good overview of who you are, because we went through so many different topics. I think it really ties nicely back to your first sentence of you've gone through many different things, and it shows in how much knowledge and information you have to offer through here. So people can reach you at Hyple, they can reach you for advice, and I think they would be very happy to work with you.
Yeah, and I would love to work with them. That's what makes us really excited, and working with these companies that want to change, but they don't really know how. So we're there for that. And it's always it's also great to have a conversation, right? And exchange this type of ideas and not experiences.
And I think it's a further testament to that philosophy that I don't think any of the questions we asked in this episode were kind of the pre-written ones, and you just went along and you just took the angle that we went down. So thank you very much for that.
No, anytime. Thank you.